you and thank you all for coming to this celebration of Merv's life of 98 years. It began 98 years ago in Kempsey, and he came to Inverell when he was 6 as the 8th of 10 children by a journey which sounds pretty outstanding at the time, with the car, with his multiple children and all manner of things up from Kempsey in the days when clearly they didn't have seat belts and occupational health and restricted numbers in cars. They came to Inverell and settled where his father bought the property at Fern Hill, just out of town, and that's where Merv spent his early days and where he commenced his schooling, which was initially at Fern Hill, local school, and then at Ross Hill, and then at high school, which was of course down here at where the Inverell Public School now is. Those of us who don't live on farms and are not living in Inverell on the winter mornings and are not riding horses to school are probably considered a pretty weak lot compared to what these kids used to do. Not only Merv, but a lot of kids at that time, of course, but it was a fairly tough time, but clearly it did them little harm. After finishing school, it was the Depression essentially when he finished school at 17, and he worked back on the farm for 2 years. And having done an accountancy diploma, he then joined his brother Barrett in town in 1934, where they formed the nucleus of what was to become Campbell Brothers and the very successful business that it was. It grew, of course, throughout the whole time from then onwards. They had 2 Byron Street addresses, secondly, of course, where Target now is, which of course was the Campbell Brothers that many of us would, of course, remember and relate to. And having had an amalgamation with Harry White, a similar company, and ultimately becoming Campbell Brothers in its own right, it prospered thereafter. During the war years, Dad was medically unfit for combatant duties and was at the area office here. He joked about defending Vivian Street, but he clearly was discharged then from the army in 1945. And Campbell Brothers continued to grow, of course, with stock transport being added to its produce business. It was the repository of the egg board for shipping eggs through town to wherever eggs came from and went to, in great amounts. I must say, they talk of 1 million eggs in a year. And it was there was a lot of tin, which was being mined around Tinga and Elsmore and elsewhere, which was also handled by Campbell Brothers. There were up to 22 employees at certain times, so it was quite a substantial business for a town of this size. And then, after the fire at the mill down by the railway, of course, they bought the mill property, and that greatly expanded the business in terms of bulk handling with the silo facilities, with the railway line, of course, directly coming into the mill. And so that increased the business, obviously, to larger levels still. They may have bought it, of course, so that I could have a job on Saturday mornings sewing wheat bags, wheat was sent to the coast at that time, and I think that it may be that the very delicate suturing that you do on wheat bags has led to me becoming an eye surgeon, but that may be drawing a bit of a long bow, I'm not sure. During all this time, Campbell Brothers, Dad was initially, of course, with his brother Bert, and when Bert retired, he was with his brother Neville, and then for the last 9 years, until he retired in 1977, he was managing the director himself. I think during all this time that Merv was very well regarded as a businessman, as a person, as a businessman. I've heard from many personal anecdotal people since that time saying what a good, honest businessman to work with he was, and he was with compassion to people needing financial assistance during the time, of course, of droughts and things in country areas where cash is strapped at times, that he carried people at times, and I think he was, without guilt in Olivia, I think he was regarded very well. He had other business interests. He was a director of Northwest Newspapers for 10 years, which was the owner of the Inverell Times previously. And he was a founding honorary director of McIntyre Housing Commission Building Society, which was advancing low-interest loans to people with building, for residential building in this town, and he was doing that for 40 years. And apart from his business interests, of course, he was always his community service, which was probably even more major as we look back. He was a founding member of APEX, which was a relatively young organisation at that time, and he was a founding member here in Inverell, and was president for several years, as well as district governor, and ultimately for 4 years was national treasurer. Sorry, should have Apexians are made to finish when they're 40 years old, and he was given life membership of Apex at that time. He then moved on to Rotary, and from 1956 until now, that's some 57 years, he was in Rotary, and like all members of service organisations like that, and Rotarians all, he was very active in doing things for the community, as they all do. He won a Paul Harris Fellow, was a Paul Harris Fellow, Paul Harris Fellowship, which is a high award in Rotary, in 1992. He was also a member of Probus, a life member of Probus. He was on the PNC and was a patron of the PNC for Inverell High School, partnered with Ross Hill before. And I guess when we were there, although I can't remember being patron, but I guess students don't notice patrons. But he was that for 20 years at the high school. He was on the advisory committee of the Red Shield in Inverell for 10 years. And then there was the Maclean Hospital, where he was on a trustee for 37 years, from 1956 to 12 residential people at that time, and of course has grown to 150 or whatever it may be now. So it was a very big time of activity at Maclean when he was trustee there. He subsequently went on with several others assisting him to work in the garden around there, Colleen, essentially growing pumpkins in vast numbers. It is presumed that people in Maclean actually liked pumpkins. They certainly got a lot of them. They were said to be 1,000 in the good crop in a good year. And of course, here at St Andrew's Church, he was a long-term member of this church and treasurer for 20 years, from 1950 to 1970. So, overall, when you look back on those extensive range of business and community involvements, he's one of those citizens of this town who contributed to the development of Inverell, amongst others. But, you know, there was a really growth time to make this town what it was. So, I just want to say something personal before Sue and my daughter Sarah speak. Running through this list of activities of business and community in our family life, I'd just like to use two terms of description of Merv. One is that he was a good man, and one that he was a decent man. He wasn't a goody-goody man, but
everybody here today would nod their heads with agreement. And I think to be regarded so after a life of 98 years is surely a testament to a life that is well lived. So for that, on behalf of Mum and of us and the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren, I say thank you, Merv. Goodbye.